Hi, everyone, and welcome to Revolutionizing Security Management. Empower your operations with Autonomic Security. Today's webinar is sponsored by Netenrich and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Keith Ward. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event today. Before we get to the content, though, we have a few housekeeping items to go over. First off, use the questions box in your webinar control panel to tell us where you are today. We see Paul here, and Tina, and Chris, and Vrej, and Edgar from all over. Everyone else, let us know where you are. Love to hear from you. And that is also the place to hit us up with questions. At the end of today's presentation, we're going to have a dedicated Q&A session to go over some of the top questions that you ask. So keep them coming in throughout. So that Q&A panel is also the place to go. If you have any technical issues, you can't hear something, you can't see something, things freeze, well, try a refresh first. And if that still doesn't work, let us know and we'll see if we can get on and help you out. Next up is the handouts section. The handouts are right next to that questions tab, and you'll find a number of outstanding resources there. There is a guide to getting started with Netenrich first and foremost, and we also have links there to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can access our huge library of books on various technology topics. A lot of them were edited by yours truly, in fact. You will also find a link to the Actual Tech Media Events Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events, including a bunch which I imagine might interest many of you. Check that out. If you see something you like, well, sign up ASAP. Okay, third, at the end of this webinar today, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one of you. Now, you have to be in attendance during the entire event to qualify for the prize. If you're interested in really dry reading, the official terms and conditions of the drawing can be found in the handouts section. Up next, it is time to meet our speaker for today. That is John Pierce, the VP of Product Management for Netenrich. And I am going to be coming on a little bit later after John finishes his presentation for some awesome Q&A. So again, keep asking those questions. In the meantime, John, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Keith. Let's dive in. But before we do that, just again, want to reintroduce myself. John Pierce. I go by JP, VP Head of Product Management here at Netenrich. I've been here for almost 2 years. I've been in cybersecurity for about 22 years. So let's dive in. So what I'm going to be going over is basically our platform overview. You know, what we are, what we do, and then at the end we'll open it up to Q&A. So keep those questions coming in. So what do? We're a modern security operations platform. So the biggest thing I want to highlight here is really aligning operational impact to business risk. And that's something that we do extremely well from that perspective. And I'll go into a little more details on how we do that and why that's important. In addition to that is we've done a lot of augmentation for detection engineering. So if you really think at the heart and core of what we do, think of a SOC analyst workbench on steroids. There's a lot of automation that we have in the product. And again, I'll be able to show that fairly soon. Ability to scale. So the biggest thing is always scaling. Organizations are going to scale up, they're going to scale down. But you know, when you start looking at how things are growing, becoming faster, more efficient, et cetera, you know, our ability to scale is quite important. And not only scaling from the perspective of just for enterprises, but we also have the capability, we're multi-tenant, multi-tiered, so we can work in very, very large organizations that may have different business units and different needs from a visibility perspective. The one thing we kind of call our platform kind of a builder's platform. So really, this allows you to really customize and really tweak and tune and dial in the platform for your specific environment. And then again, for onboarding, we have customer success management. I'll go through an example of what they do and why that's important. The biggest thing is time to value, and we can do that very, very quickly. And again, we have professional services model. Thank you, Keith. Let's dive in. But before we do that, just again, want to reintroduce myself. John Pierce. I go by JP, VP Head of Product Management here at Netenrich. I've been here for almost 2 years. I've been in cybersecurity for about 22 years. So let's dive in. So what I'm going to be going over is basically our platform overview. What we are, what we do, and then at the end we'll open it up to Q&A. So keep those questions coming in. So what do? We're a modern security operations platform. So the biggest thing I want to highlight here is really aligning operational impact to business risk. And that's something that we do extremely well from that perspective. And I'll go into a little more details on how we do that and why that's important. In addition to that is we've done a lot of augmentation for detection engineering. So if you really think at the heart and core of what we do, think of a SOC analyst workbench on steroids. There's a lot of automation that we have in the product. And again, I'll be able to show that fairly soon. Ability to scale. So the biggest thing is always scaling. Organizations are going to scale up, they're going to scale down. But when you start looking at how things are growing, becoming faster, more efficient, etc., our ability to scale is quite important. And not only scaling from the perspective of just for enterprises, but we also have the capability, we're multi-tenant, multi-tiered, so we can work in very, very large organizations that may have different business units and different needs from a visibility perspective. The one thing we kind of call our platform kind of a builder's platform. So really this allows you to really customize and really tweak and tune and dial in the platform for your specific environment. And then again, for onboarding, we have customer success management. I'll go through an example of what they do and why that's important. The biggest thing is time to value, and we can do that very, very quickly. And again, we have professional services model to help manage risk as well. So leveraging a modern cybersecurity mesh architecture. So, we're often asked, are you a SIM, SOAR, et cetera? No, we're not at all. We basically sit on top of that. So Resolution Intelligence Cloud sits on top of SIM and SOAR. And then if you look at a mesh is like everything that's coming in. So all the telemetry that you have, whether it's security telemetry, operational telemetry, we have our own set of intelligence, but you can also use third-party intelligence as well. So when you look at data analytics and data engineering, that's all important, but it's what matters in the middle, right? All the AI and ML and predictive capabilities, that we are able to provide. And I'll kind of go through that workflow next to kind of show you what that looks like from ingest, coming out the back end. But really, when you look at it, before I get there, Keith, the biggest thing is transformation, right? And I believe we're going through another era of transformation where you're seeing a lot of point technologies now becoming consumed and commoditized as a feature, right? So the biggest thing is really trying to reduce toil and refocus effort. So if you can automate a lot of routine tasks, that's going to free up other people to do more important things or better things from that perspective. Situational awareness, and I'll talk about that. We have kind of a different nomenclature here at Netenrich, but situational awareness is extremely important, right? Every situation isn't bad, but some are. Again, petabytes at scale. We use Chronicle as our data lake on the back end, so you can imagine the speed of search if you're doing, retro threat hunts, so on and so forth. And then again, being resilient in self-healing systems. Again, by having all this information that we provide on your infrastructure, these are things that we can do to speed up the response, by plugging into a SOAR as an example, or our own capabilities from our backend perspective. So this is how Resolution Intelligence Cloud works. As I talked about in the previous slide about the mesh architecture, so we want to ingest all telemetry. As I mentioned, I gave some examples in a couple slides ago, but again, we want to collect all that. All that comes into Chronicle, which we use as our data lake. So we classify it, they normalize the data, and then we pump that into what we call our Act-On data lake. So within there, we're doing correlation, we're doing anomaly detection, ML, looking at impact, risk, and so much more. So these all run in real time. And then again, we automate a lot of, I guess, mundane tasks. So again, we can bubble that up to when we give context and act-ons. So let me pause there for a moment, though, because I mentioned, we have like a different nomenclature. So you have events that come in, right? And with those events, we translate those to signals. So think those signals as an event from CrowdStrike or Palo Alto Networks, et cetera. So these are individual events, but we take these individual events based on all the different runtime analytics that we're doing, and we do the correlation. So if we see a correlation, we turn it into a situation, and that situation is scored. Likelihood, impact, and confidence, and I'll go through that in more detail. But the way that it becomes an incident, which we call an act-on, is through an act-on policy. And again, that's based off of likelihood, impact, and confidence. So as an example, there's a situation that has an impact of 80. So we scored, 0 to 100, 100 being the double. So any situation that has an impact score of 80, meaning it's going to take my business offline, or cause damage to my business, make it an act on. And at that point, it's all hands on deck. And what we're able to do in the product is we have one feature capability called functions. So in functions, these are your core apps that would break the business if they went down. So for example, we monitor everything within Netenrich, on our app.netenrich.com. So we have basically our notification pipeline. So if that notification pipeline goes down, that means customers are not going to be able to get any type of information via email, via webhook. So think of, Microsoft Teams, chat, etc. So these are things that we monitor. And then based on that, we have the capability in the event something goes wrong. Could be malware as an example, or it could be scale issues. A security analyst will see it, but we're able to do what we call intelligent routing and then be able to route that to the right people. So it could be someone in DevOps, because a SOC analyst is not going to be able to take a server offline or, isolate a server, so on and so forth. I mean, one can argue you can do that with SOAR, but just giving a real world example of how that happens and how that flow is, but I'll go into more detail on that. So when you really look at key platform pillars, these 5 are really important to Netenrich. Data visibility, so ingest all security and operational data. Making sure there's clean data lineage, quality, and a complete operational picture. Some can argue that you're only as good as your CMDB. Especially, you have cloud, you have, servers spinning up and spinning down. I talked about the intelligent routing. We think that's extremely important to really get the teams involved when needed, but very quickly. Response orchestration, policy-driven containment, we think is extremely important. You have to be really surgical on that, and configuring the notification pipeline. Security analysis, so gain situational awareness and understanding of behaviors. We really provide that for you. Obviously you're going to have to do internal assessments on what's good and what's bad, right? Or if this breaks the business, what do we need to do about that? What are those, ones that, we can address risk the most and minimize the impact? And then continuous feedback. So there's always, validating and adapting to drive our models. We have behavioral models and they're tied to the Chronicle UDM. So with that, there's thousands upon thousands of different use cases you can do from a behavioral modeling perspective. And again, it's one set of many things that we're able to do when we're doing the analytics and correlation and scoring. So let's get into risk scoring. So again, reducing noise and workload, I think, is really important. So, likelihood, impact, and confidence. So starting with confidence, this is the signal confidence analytics. So as I talked about, events will come in and everything will be turned into a signal, right? So, looking at prevalence, time series, active learning. But anyway, you want to discern, if it's a true positive, of a signal, but not just by rules, right? You need more than rules, especially how we live today. When you look at likelihood, so again, these are using behavioral analytics, kill chain analytics, so things that are tied to the MITRE mapping, MITRE attack, exposure analytics. So we also have attack surface management. We call it attack surface exposures, but this is really looking at your external attack surface as well. So, if we have information on a critical vulnerability that's getting exploited in the wild and it has a CVSS score of a 9, the likelihood of that specific asset being impacted is relatively high. And then when we looked at, impact, that's just it. So looking at users and assets, we look at them as entities. So an entity could be user, asset, application, could be a process. We can get Keith pretty deep on that. Business impact analytics and informational impact analytics. So there's a lot of measurement coming from there. But again, understanding the business. And again, I keep going back to what will break the business. It's not everything in your environment. But again, having a clear handle on that is extremely important. And lots of customers do BIAs, but typically those are done once a year, sometimes 3, sometimes 5. So there's practices I think that we need to get more involved in from a security professional perspective, and making sure that those are updated, because those can play a big role in dialing in risk for your organization. So this is just one example of basically the funnel. So this is a real use case. This was in 1 week. So we onboarded this customer. It's a life sciences company, but they had 14 billion events. It was unreal how many events came in. We took that, based on all the information we have, all our analytics, so on and so forth, and we pull those into signals, right? You can see the reduction there is huge. And then based on those signals, now we're further able to reduce that to 10,000 situations, right? And these 10,000 situations are scored. And you're probably looking, wow, 34 act-ons. Well, as I mentioned before, we have what's called an act-on policy. And within that act-on policy, you can really dial it into what's important. So, I mean, no one's going to be able to look at 10,000, situations, period, right? You're going to need an army to do that. But really getting it down to 34 act-ons is really important. And this was a one of many successes that we've had. But as you can see, with a lot of the automation that we're able to do in the platform, we would never, ever be able to come down to 34. All right, Keith, I'm going to hand it back to you. It looks like we got some questions coming in.
Yeah, we sure do, JP. Thank you so much for that overview and a topic that is, boy, as relevant as it gets right now. 14 billion events. Yeah, that's a few, isn't it? I mean, so if you can handle that, you can pretty much handle anything that anybody can throw at you, right? Correct. That's a pretty darn big number. And you're right, there's a lot of interest in this, and we're getting some great questions. So why don't we dive in? First up today, how does Autonomic Security Operations, also what you refer to as ASO, differ from traditional security management approaches?
It's a good question, Keith. Traditionally, I mean, people are trying to throw bodies at it, and it just doesn't scale. So with ASOs, we allow your teams to scale and basically do more with less. Cybersecurity professionals are extremely expensive. And the ones that you do train up typically only last like 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. They go and make more money, doing basically the same thing and perhaps maybe getting a senior title. So, our approach to ASO is really the automation capabilities of it. And that's just not automating just tier 1, tier 2, but importing entities, assets, all that, being able to pull in, if, a customer tagged everything in GCP, Azure, and AWS, being able to pull those in with ease. Leveraging generative AI is important. The one thing I didn't get to touch on was, we are ML models that we have. You can basically have a conversation with data with that specific model. So if you set up a model that had, rare country visits, right? And, Keith is always in the US, but all of a sudden, Keith and several of his colleagues are logging into China or Korea or wherever, those models kind of look at standard deviation. So the deviation can be below the line or above the line. But for example, with that specific use case that I mentioned, Keith, is that I can go in and instead of looking at lists, right, I can say what users accessed, a different country and at what time, so on and so forth. What IP addresses, did they go to? If we have all that information, then you'll get a response. It's just like ChatGPT.
Right.
So that's just scratching the absolute surface of how we can use generative AI in the platform. So I can't go into a whole lot of details because a lot of the stuff is roadmapped and working in our innovations lab. But the thing is, we want to basically make it self-healing and less human touch. You're always going to have humans involved. It's more of a co-pilot, Keith. So we're not not going to automate people out of their jobs, but that's ASO at a very, very high clip. That was a good question.
And you always have to be careful with me because I'm really shifty that way, like you described in your answer. Okay, next up, can you explain more about Netenrich solutions and how they contribute to the autonomic security operations?
Yeah, I mean, we have basically our threat hunting team as well from a services perspective. So, we can definitely help customers, doing retro threat hunts. From a professional services perspective, we can help, operationalize the environment very quickly. So, you don't have to have a set of dedicated detection engineers. So detection engineers, for those that don't know what that is, it's basically the men and women that make rules, right? So there may be rules looking for stuff for Office, Office or Gmail, whatever, from that perspective. So you have a set of individuals on our team that does that. Then you have data engineers. So those are the ones that will enhance parsers. So, on the Chronicle backend, they do have parsers, but they capture a subset of fields, right? So a customer might be like, well, hey, I need these other 19 fields in there, right? So that would take, a data engineer to go in and basically, tweak the parser to make sure the relevant information were to come out, get parsed and put into, into our platform. So we think that's super important because again, the cost of detection engineers and data engineers is becoming more and more expensive, and I think you'll hear more of those terms through the next year or two, because typically working in a security company, right, we're creating rules and parsers and stuff, and that's what in the industry we call detection engineering and data engineering.
Right, sure. Okay, here we've got a kind of a C-level question up for you next. So, what are the key challenges that ASO wants to address in managing the business risk profile?
Yeah, the biggest thing is, I mean, being able to find what that risk is and reducing the business impact from that. So, the biggest thing and how we look at it, I talked about like customer success management team that we have, but it's more of taking a consultative approach, right? I mean, I've been in security building products for 22 years, and I remember IPS, right? You'd have to intrusion prevention systems, and I'm dating myself, but you do have to dial those in a little bit, right? But typically, just drop it in, and all these events come out, right? And what's interesting about that is, it is true that we've seen said vulnerability or exploit go through it, right? But we don't have enough information as a point solution. Was that server even patched, or was it a Windows exploit going against a Linux server, right? And SIMs came in, and you kind of tie all that stuff together. But Netenrich started at doing IT ops, So we understand infrastructure. We understand it really, really well. So, marrying that type of expertise with security, right? Because typically securities used to be like, the last thing people would think of, or there wasn't a lot of money, but you look at all the regulatory compliance that just came out. I think the SEC came out with a new regulatory standard that companies have to follow in terms of if they get breached for breach disclosure. There's a lot of details within there, and I know some of it's discretionary. But from a C-level perspective, it's really taking the conversation to the boardroom, and then kind of working your way down to, again, understanding what breaks the business. And that was a conversation. We had a CISO event in New York City in Manhattan last week, and that was the biggest thing. Talking about BIAs and bringing it to the boardroom, and people really understanding, what's your threshold of risk? Like, am I okay if I go down for 4 hours? Maybe, right? But if you're in media and entertainment, 4 hours, can get a lot of bad customer satisfaction. But anyway, hope that answers
Yeah,
the question.
yeah. And reputational damage that you may not ever recover too. Next is a question that I love, because I love case studies. So can you provide specific examples of how Netenrich has improved security outcomes for organizations?
Yeah, that last slide I showed you, kind of the funnel. That was amazing. They were pretty much blown away. They're really able to focus and attack those 34 act-ons a heck of a lot quicker, because they're also able to prioritize them, right? Because they're all scored, so they can put that in chronological order on what they're going to work towards. I think another big thing, so that's the output of it, right? But the biggest thing is, time to value. And with this specific customer, it took us about 3 hours to get, events coming in, and probably another week or so to really tune it. So the time to value that we're able to show our customers is just amazing. And we hear that all the time, because typically when you look at SIM and, other technologies, I'm not banging on them, but you really have to dial those in. And again, I don't think there's that much of a consultative approach, and having that with the customer. But yeah, this specific customer was, really, really, really happy with that. And the thing is, like, when, you're deploying products and stuff like that, we're talking about like how we want to automate, streamline, and make our platform more efficient. It's the same thing as we go through with the, consultative approach with our CSMs. What can we automate? What can we do better? What can we do faster? So it's not just tech, but it's process as well, and follow up, and really going on the customer journey with them.
And that quicker learning curve, it leads to quicker uptake, and learning a system faster, fewer holes, fewer breaches, better security faster. So it all kind of works together. Absolutely. All right, next up, JP, what role does cybersecurity mesh architecture play in ASO, and how does it benefit security operations? And you may want to start this off just by giving us a real quick definition of cybersecurity mesh architecture.
Yeah, the CSMA was coined by Gartner, and it's an architecture, right? So the whole thing about that is basically looking at the entire ecosystem of telemetry, regardless of it being IT data or security data that's coming in. And, in the mesh, what sits on the top of the mesh is SIM and SOAR. So as a product manager, and you'll appreciate this, we'll go into CSMA, why we think it's an important data point. But when you talk to Gartner and other analysts, they want to put you in a box. They want to, okay, you're a SOAR, you're a SIM. And it's like, well, no, I mean, to us, we look at those as features. So it clicked when I was with Gartner talking with them, and I'm like, you know what? We sit at the apex of that, of SIM and SOAR, with all the enrichments, everything that we're doing, much faster, more context, so on and so forth. So, I don't think they're ever going to make a magic quadrant out of CSMA. but we embrace that architecture because it's just right, for our fit and what we do and how we're able to scale from that perspective. Hope that
Gotcha.
answers their question.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And next up for you, can you share insights on the integration of DevOps engineering practices into security operations? And I would add a little add on. Is that what you would call, within your company, within Netenrich? Do you also call that DevSecOps as it's being coming to be known these days?
Yeah, I mean, we use both terms from that perspective, but DevSecOps, I mean, there is a little bit of difference between them, between both
Mm-hmm.
of them, but you know, we we drink our own champagne, right? So we use it internally. And what's really good about it is there's a lot of experts in security here within Netenrich, but you also have developers, right? And you know, developers coming out of uni or if they're learning or whatever, there's probably some classes they take on secure coding, or there's tools out there that you can run your code through to see if if there's any vulnerabilities or bugs, so on and so forth. But we really saw that you have to get everybody involved, and our DevOps team, DevSecOps, they're all involved. And let me tell you how we see that. I talked about like intelligent routing. So within the platform, I mean, we can integrate like with Snow and ticketing services, so on and so forth. But we do have what we call escalations. So within escalations, who's ever on duty, you know, 8 to 5 or whatever the follow the sun is, you can actually put those individuals in there and tie them to, remember I talked about functions, right? Functions are things that can break the business. And at that point, it's all hands on deck. It's people from a security perspective, looking at it. And then obviously when it gets routed to other people that are non-security team, obviously security team is kept in a loop, but they're able to contain um, whatever that is, right? Containment is huge, but again, the only way you can contain is by involving all the key parties involved. So when you start looking at like SRE, site reliability engineering, we look at that as well. How do we get those men and women plugged in as well? So yeah, we look at this holistically, and again, it comes from our DNA as an IT ops company, and pivoting into security, which was just a natural fit for Netenrich.
Right. I have to say, I like the metaphor drinking your own champagne much better than what people normally say, which is eating your own dog food. That's a much much better picture for me. So thank you. I may steal that for the future. Okay, let's move on then. How does ASO contribute to enhancing operational efficiency and accelerating time to value? Now you've touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can dive into that a bit more here.
Yeah, I mean, I can. There's a lot I can dive into there, but I talked about the whole thing about automation and streamlining. So one example is, I talked about the workbench, right, where you can view signals, situations, and act-ons. But there's an analyst log that we have in there that we've automated hundreds of, basically hundreds of steps that an analyst would have to do. Because I've seen it, when I was a product manager at SecureWorks and Alert Logic, I always had to go on ride-alongs with the SOC, right? Because the SOC was my customer too. And, they have 3 screens up and context switching through all of them. There was some automation through scripting and stuff that they did, but it was highly inefficient. And, sometimes things will come through that are deemed critical, but then they get downgraded because there's more contextual information. So how we streamline that is one, doing that automation, um, pulling together all the context that's relevant to it, being able to score, and then within a situation or with an act on, I talked about like how you can set up these different functions, things that break the business. those are front and center. You see those immediately. So yeah, the whole thing about being efficient is, how can we move and run faster? Again, which frees up, analysts to work on things that are important. And again, the whole time to value, we see that as a game changer for us, because being able to show, your proof of value very quickly is a win-win all the way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think we have time for one more question today, JP. And this deals with something that's been a challenge forever and continues to be a challenge. So the question is, what strategies do you recommend for breaking down organizational silos in security management? So the S word again, right? Silos are still much more prevalent in our industry than people think is kind of my opinion. So how do you answer that one?
This is a tough one, right? Because I mean, you're right. We could have the same conversation 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And it's, hey, we're going to break down the silos and bring people together. I think a lot of it has to do with the boardroom. I think people are getting much better, at kind of breaking down those silos, because with all the regulatory compliance and stuff and controls, um, you kind of have to. Um, Not a lot of platforms, in my opinion, are poised to bring all that together, right? And when you look at our platform, we do just that, and I've been told by analysts as well, this is great, but some people on their journey are just not there from a maturity perspective. So I think, you know, when you're doing BIAs, I mean, that involves, a lot of people in the organization. Um, I think, you know, measuring certain KPIs across the business units would be important. But I mean, I was quite impressed at the event I went to last week that I spoke at in New York City. It was a bunch of CISOs. So you think massive global financials. Um, those questions were, asked of several different big companies, and they really seem to have it together in terms of communication and, understanding the importance of where security, starts and stops. So I was quite impressed, because typically, you'll throw a question out there about, things being siloed, and you have a bunch of head nods. Yep. It's still like that. So I think the more mature companies see it, and again, it's all about that security maturity, but I think it's just taking people on that journey. And I think if we have that, if we have the same conversation, Keith, in 5 years, we're in trouble.
I, I agree with that. Hopefully, but I mean, in this industry, the silos I find to be very stubborn.
Hmm.
Very stubborn. But it's time to realize how they're harming your business, how they're harming your organization.
Yeah.
So if you've got them, find them, hunt them down, and kill them with fire, right?
Yeah.
As they say nowadays. So, JP, this has been such a fun conversation. I've really enjoyed the Q&A. Loved your presentation, learning all about autonomic security operations and what Netenrich is doing. I love the innovation that the company is involved in. And I really appreciate you being on with us and for your insights in the Q&A today. It's just been a real delight to talk with you. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, Keith. Take care.
All right. Okay. Hope everyone enjoyed that. I love in-depth Q&As. That was a whole lot of fun. Thanks so much for your questions, everyone, and for keeping them coming throughout there. And with that, everyone, we're just about done for today. We have one more piece of business to take care of, and that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. As I mentioned at the outset, you do have to be present for the entire event to be eligible to win the prize, and we do have a winner for today. That winner is Brian Berryhill from Texas. Hey, congratulations to you, Brian. We'll be in touch very soon to get you your card. And with that, folks, we are wrapped. On behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank John and Netenrich for making this event possible. Thanks to all of you who were here joining us today, and for attending and for your great questions. We got to a bunch of them, and that is always awesome for me when we can have that interaction. It was such a pleasure to be here with you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. So that concludes today's event, folks. Have a great rest of your day.